So that Hellcat Outrun was a red-eye full bolt-on E85, and that was actually the car making 70 less wheel horsepower. It was like 570 when they ran the actual Hellcat, not 630 like you see here. So how do you make 630 wheel horsepower? Let's get something out of the way. If you believe that a hand-drilled 5/64 high-pressure line is all you need, then this is the wrong video for you, and this is the wrong channel for you, because we believe in the next level of things that make a difference. That means, who's we? JSR Engines and Jake and I, we know what works. We've tested what works, and we've upgraded cars so that they may have made more power on direct injection than people have before on Honda. So, to give you a direct comparison side by side, so Honda, everybody knows there's a pressure loss in there, and you can add pressure, but you still get a pressure loss no matter what you do when you start taxing the pump. But with that being said, XDI, one car, Motec, XDI pump, hand-drilled line, XDI injectors. The car made 529 at like 6,500, and then you saw this blip in the graph, and that's what happens when you get a big old misfire in there. You get a bloop in the graph, and it was like at 6,500 RPM. And what was probably happening was they were making the boost higher, further back in the RPM range, because they were running out of fuel. So they just pushed the boost up higher, further back. Now, then also, for whatever reason, and I don't get into it, but it didn't look like the car spooled full torque until 5,000 RPM, which was very odd. Not sure why. I believe that same car supposedly had an MHI on it and had no problem spooling the MHI beforehand. I don't know. I'm not sure why. Maybe they just pushed it back to try to make the most power. I can understand that, like trying to keep the torque down until the last second to make a nice big peak power number. I'm not sure, but we made, and that car made like 629 horsepower at like 65, and I think it was like 3. I meant to say 529, like the graph shown here. The car made 529 wheel and like 393 torque, but you can see what I mean by spooling at the last second. And I also talk about a dip in the graph, and the dip is circled here, and that's what happens when you get a direct injection misfire or something. The graph that was sent to me on the car on Motec. And then we did on Honda, and mind you, keep in mind, on Honda, the pump controls were not available until very recently, and we have a pressure loss to deal with. So the car over here, XDI pump, the high pressure line drilled the right way that we do it with taper and a smooth bore, and Fk8td injectors. We made 552 wheel horsepower and 430, I think it was 437 foot-pounds of torque, and torque was at the same from 4,500 pretty far onto the graph, and we had a clean graph all the way out to 7,200. 551.4 horsepower and 439 foot-pounds of torque. So, that's because we don't believe in just hand drilling lines. That's part of the equation. Taper, smooth bore, this stuff starts to add up. That's part of the equation here for 630 wheel horsepower. We don't just run a stock in-tank pump, and we don't run a Honda in-tank pump. I do have fuel system upgrades on my website, www.fk8td.com. I have a whole fuel system combined. I now am a dealer for XDI, and I have a whole fuel system, and it's what we used to make 552 wheel horsepower on E45 on that car. Both cars had G3770 turbo kits. If you think you're going to make 550 wheel horsepower with just a drop-in turbo on the same fuel system, I'm sorry guys, it doesn't work that way. The turbine side is going to be too much of a restriction for you to make power. You will actually lose power because you're actually creating a restriction there at the turbine housing. If you have a G25 660 kit and you have put a bigger 92 housing on it, yeah, you can get up there. You don't necessarily need a G30 kit. Just to give you an idea, there was a Honda line on a car. When we got done, it was like really just stuck at 503 with my injector. So I'm like, man, this thing is, I was like, that line can't be right. It's not right. Something's wrong. Well, we took it out and modified JSR, you know, talked to him about modifying it properly. And we made 520 wheel horsepower on the same amount of ethanol as we made 503. The car picked up 17 wheel horsepower just from that. And again, clean graph. It was not something that he got on the street and it started misfiring or something like that. It wasn't a one-hit wonder pull. You know, if you think that just a regular 600 cubic inch intercooler core is enough to make 600 horsepower, well, you're not going to be there. Those things begin to add up and make a difference. Cores that I know work, Mishimoto, Full Race, and Ultimate Racing are all big enough, well enough to support well over 600 wheel horsepower. Well, how do I know? Well, I made 614. So to make 630 on another car on just direct injection, you know, we've got another couple things that we like to do to the car that add up, but they only add up when these original mods are done in the first place. See, that's where the things start getting a little bit skewed. Like, oh, upgrading your lines to 6AN on your flex fuel kit is not going to gain you any fuel. Well, it might be fine. You say it's not because you hand drilled your high pressure line. I can't. That's not my fault. That those parts were not combined correctly. You know, and I myself hit a limit, but only because the pump in my surge tank had an 80 psi pressure relief valve, and it was creating pumping issues. And I made 545 on my car in direct injection only, but I had an issue. I ran out of fuel because of that. And keep in mind, Pondetta pump controls are just not there at the time. Now they're there, so we're going to work on them, getting them straightened out. So if you really are after like big power, another thing is you're not going to make it on a stock cylinder head. Let me just say this right now. If you're on a stock cylinder head, it doesn't matter how much you rev the car, you are not going to get there. Unfortunately, somebody I know was on a stock cylinder head because at the time everybody was saying ported head loses power, ported head loses power. And it just bugs me how one person was going around saying the same thing. And now he has a ported cylinder head from the same person they said that it lost power from. And me, I never said it lost power, but I asked a lot of people for info because I'm wondering, where does this loss of power come from porting a cylinder head? Because every time you port a cylinder head, you make more power. And the crazy part is on these cars, you port it right, you make more power on the same amount of fuel. And that's got to do with ignition timing and the way it mixes in the cylinder. And doing other things that I'm not going to get into. There are things you do to cylinder head besides port them to make them take more ignition timing without hot spots. So unfortunately, even with Motec and all the port injection in the world, I think it took some radical, like on the G3900, something like 36, 37 PSI to make like 570 something. And some people are like, oh, I just like crappy tuner, blah, blah, blah. Well, here's the thing, like a G3900, yes, it's more efficient than a G25 660 or a G30 770. The thing is, the cylinder head has to be able to move the air to make the power. The built bottom end doesn't make the difference. If you're going to build your bottom end, you're not going to port your cylinder head. Do not expect to make any more power than you did before as far as like peak horsepower. Maybe you'll gain 5 horsepower, maybe 10 horsepower because you've got less ring drag on the cylinder walls or something like that. You might be able to get a little bit more ignition timing because you don't have like a hot spot in the cylinder or something because you have a better piston. You know, and all reality is you're not going to make a lot of power from the bottom end. And I went over the idea of going to an 88 millimeter piston and seeing if that would like be, you know, a good effect, but I found out that boring out to 88 millimeters, one, doesn't give you the ability to redo the cylinder if you have any sort of issue, and it's like 10 horsepower. So for me, that ain't worth it. Not that 10 horsepower. But there are things you can do where you can take the injectors that I sell and you can squeeze them all the way out to 552 wheel horsepower on pump ethanol blend. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching the video. Hit the like, subscribe. Check out my products, www.fk8td.com. I have flex fuel kit 6 hand line upgrades for PRL, APE. I have them for, I have my own flex fuel kit now that comes standard with my lines. Well, PTFE core, HMBR O-rings. Anyway, the whole story, it's all there. Everything's there in the description. Rampage Fabrication dealer as well. Shout out to them, because without Rampage turbo kits, this wouldn't have been possible. Fantastic fitment, great turbo kits. Anyway, thank you so much for tuning in. Appreciate everybody. And hit the like, to subscribe, to share.